Excuse me. Morning glory, evening grace, brethren and sisters. Have all of you back along with us here with Temperance Awakening, and I look forward to doing our next tobacco lecture here today, and doing a very important lecture here about how tobacco leads to more reckless activity. Because we're going to see here, tobacco certainly does lead to reckless activity, particularly leads to other drug use. And of course, this is a faith-based ministry, Bible-believing ministry here. And so we're going to be looking at some Bible verses here to go along with this whenever we conclude the study here. Of course, the United States government has banned highly addictive drugs that affect mood, concentration, or behavior. Illicit drugs such as amphetamines, which is commonly known as speed, cocaine, and heroin, are still illegal in the United States. Of course, some states recently did legalize recreational marijuana, as that is that's a very controversial topic right now. And research into drug dependency shows that for some people, especially teenagers, this is very important for teenagers. This study here shows that for teenagers, cigarette smoking is often the first step toward the use of illegal drugs, like cigarette smoking or any kind of tobacco products. And the government has used several methods to assess how many young people are involved with drugs. One effort has been an organization. Has been a NIDA, which we've referenced before, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They do a study called Monitoring the Future. And they poll more than 40,000 students each year for information on drug use and attitudes toward drugs. According to the figures for 2003, almost 25% of students used marijuana, 8% used amphetamines, and almost 8% used inhalants. And more than one-half of the students used alcohol in 2003, and almost one-quarter of the high school seniors surveyed were active smokers. Please excuse me, I can't get my throat clear here. And now we're going to look particularly at nicotine as being a gateway drug. For young people, nicotine is usually the first drug that they attain relatively easily. Then after that, alcohol. And of course, tobacco and alcohol are found in many homes because they are two legal substances in the United States, many countries. And then after that, after tobacco, alcohol, and then marijuana, and then we have marijuana. And these substances introduce people to drug abuse and can lead to the use of more serious drugs. And I'm going to look at one of our fact or fiction statements here. Someone might say it's just a cigarette. Smoking isn't about doing drugs. And for a majority of tobacco users, this statement is certainly true. But consider the 1994 report from the National Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse. Young people who smoked were 19 times more likely to end up abusing cocaine compared to non-smokers. And for a troubling number of people, cigarette smoking is often the first indicator of a willingness to take risk with their health. And for many years, cigarette smoking has been used to predict the likelihood of people graduating to illegal drugs. A 1994 study by Columbia University Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse found that the earlier young people become involved with activities like smoking or drinking, the more likely they are to proceed to harder drugs. The researchers found that 90% of cocaine abusers had used tobacco, alcohol, or marijuana first. Youthful smokers with a daily habit were 13 times more likely to use heroin than young people who smoked less often. A 2000 study by NIDA revealed that 2/3 of drug users are also smokers, more than twice the percentage of smokers found in the general population. Another NIDA research group studied people who were receiving drug treatment. The group was divided into non-smokers, light smokers, and heavy smokers. Urine tests from the subject showed traces of opiates such as heroin in 14.3% of the non-smokers. Light smokers had traces of cocaine in 27.3% of tests, with opiates turning up in 35.4%. Heavy smokers, people who smoke 20 to 40 cigarettes a day, showed traces of cocaine in 55.8% of the test, with positive results for opiates in 53.2% of the test. According to NIDA use statistics in 2000, some 52% of young smokers with a daily habit had also used illegal drugs in the previous 30 days. Among heavy alcohol users, 66% had used illicit drugs in the same time period. Those using both cigarettes and alcohol were more than twice as likely to have used illicit drugs in a 1-month period when compared with youths who used only one cigarette or only alcohol. Who used only cigarettes or alcohol. Compared to young people who used neither gateway substance, those who used only cigarettes or only alcohol were more than 7 times as likely to have used illegal drugs in the previous month. The American Academy of Pediatrics, a national organization of medical professionals who treat young people, issued a warning to parents on the subject of gateway drugs. While using alcohol and tobacco, young people develop behaviors that can also be associated with using drugs, such as a willingness to take chances. According to the AAP, using tobacco and alcohol teaches young people 5 things. Number 1, how to obtain substances illegally. 2nd, how much of the substance to use. 3rd, how to control the side effects. 4, how to hide what they've done and lie about it. And then 5th, how to deal with any guilt and shame over what they've done. Now, the AAP is saying here that the use of alcohol and tobacco sets up patterns of behavior that might make it easier to take the next step and use other drugs. And see, simply mastering the art of smoking is an important stepping stone to other drugs, because smoking is, after all, an unnatural act. Inhaling a substance that makes one choke. A 1972 Canadian government report on drugs noted that inhaling smoke is difficult and unpleasant for the starting smoker. He or she needs considerable practice to control the reflex to choke or cough. Before a person can take pleasure from smoking, this natural obstacle must be overcome. Then, as the report puts it, the general smoking barrier is removed and the smoker is then more likely to try smoking other drugs. See, young people tend to live in the moment, without much thought for the future. I'm a young individual, not thinking about what's going to happen down the road. And as they reach their teenage years, they discover a wider world with many new opportunities and dangers. Sometimes you may hear about teens who experiment with drugs and alcohol as if they were in a chemistry lab. See, unfortunately, their laboratories are their own bodies, and still worse, these young people move on to perform more risky experiments. Since 1991, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention has monitored the chances young people take with their health through the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, YRBSS. It is a nationwide survey of selected students from the 7th to the 12th grades. Students answer a variety of questions on subjects that concern their health and well-being, including tobacco use, unhealthy lifestyles, alcohol and drug use, sexual behavior, and activities that lead to injury or violence. In 2000, researchers for the Department of Health and Human Services analyzed results from the YRBSS and 2 other government surveys on risky activities, the other 2 organizations being the National Longitude Study of Adolescent Health and the National Survey of Adolescent Males. Their report, Teen Risk-Taking, a statistical portrait, focused on 10 risky behaviors. Risky alcohol, regular alcohol use, regular binge drinking, regular tobacco use, marijuana use, other illegal drug use, fighting, weapon carrying, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, and risky sexual activity. Overall, 54% of the students responding engaged in at least one risky behavior. Only 4% of the respondents engaged in 5 or more of the behaviors. As the students got older, more and more of them became involved in risky behaviors. Smokers made up 11% of the responding group. However, 85% of those smokers engaged in additional risky behaviors. These researchers found that 32% of smokers engaged in regular alcohol use and 40% took part in regular binge drinking. In addition, 35% of tobacco smokers also smoked marijuana and 41% used other illicit drugs. In terms of violence, 17% of smokers got involved in fights and 21% carried weapons. Among smokers, 19% admitted to suicidal thoughts and 24% had made a suicide attempt. A full quarter, 25% of smokers engaged in unprotected sexual intercourse. According to adolescent smoking statistics issued by the American Lung Association in 2003, 4.5 million young people smoke in the United States. Very large stat there. With so many youthful smokers potentially at risk, one can understand the emphasis that former Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders put on smoking. I like the quote she said here. She said, "This is one of the few early warning signs we have in public health. If we can prevent tobacco use in the first place, we might have a big impact on preventing or delaying a host of other destructive behaviors among our young people." That's certainly how true that very is. And that's one reason why, you know, older people, when I say older, I mean people, you know, like above that youth age, they set a very, very bad example. They set a very, very, very bad example to, you know, to young people. And young people, you know, who try smoking, you know, they just graduate to other things. And that's biblical. Some of the verses, a few verses we're going to look at here. We're not going to, you know, really preach here. Not going to be too long. But tobacco is just that. It's often the first sinful pleasure that many people have, you know, particularly of that young age. As the Bible says in 1 John chapter 3 and verse number 4, "Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law." And that's certainly true, like with many Bible-believing Christians. You know, most Bible-believing Christians who use tobacco, you know, will say, "Yeah, you know, I know it's wrong, but it's an addiction." You know, and they won't get rid of it. Even though they admit that they have open sin in their life. See, that's open sin. You know, just, you know, anybody can see, you know, can see and smell, you know, a tobacco user, and they are transgressing. You know, they are transgressing. You know, they are, you know, they're sinning. You know, and they openly admit it. And, you know, whenever you've gone over there, you know, you just go further and further. Like there's that old phrase, sin will take you further than you want to go. James 1:15. "Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." So you just start there a little bit. See, that's good for young people. Well, you know, for some, you know, young person, well, I'm just going to try a cigarette, or I'm going to try a can of dip, or or a chewing tobacco. Then they take that, you know, first bit, and then they do it the next day. And then it just continues, and before they know it, you know, they're into alcohol, you know, other drugs, other risky activity. And then boom, just like the verse says there, "When lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin." See, it starts with that lust. See, I know whenever people say lust, they often associate that with like sexual things, but that's not always the case. Especially for young people, like with tobacco. You know, it makes them feel old and grown up and all. You know, I wanna try that can of dip. I wanna try that smoke. I wanna try that cigar. You know, whatever it is. See, when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. Then they sin, and then sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. And that's especially true with tobacco. You know, even if you're a person that never, you know, that only uses tobacco, that never drinks alcohol or smokes marijuana or does anything else, you know, tobacco is the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. When it is finished, it bringeth forth death. Then one more verse here out of Romans chapter number 6. Romans 6:19. "I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. For as ye have yielded your members servants to uncleanness, and to iniquity unto iniquity, even so now yield your members servants to righteousness unto holiness." See the first part of that verse there? Because of the infirmity of your flesh. See, it just starts there, you know, with that flesh. "For as ye have yielded your members servants to uncleanness, and to iniquity unto iniquity." See, people in the Church of Rome, they first began in uncleanness, then they began living in iniquity, which, you know, just led to more iniquity. And that's exactly what tobacco can do for anybody. It just leads to more and more iniquity in a life. And we can say that just about the addiction to tobacco itself. Well, I'm just going to try one I'm just going to try one cigarette or one chew or one dip. Then your body starts to like that nicotine and you're addicted to it. It becomes an addiction. That is very hard to break. It is possible, thank God, to break that addiction. That's what this ministry is all about. But it's certainly best if you never started to begin with. So thank you so much for being there with us on this lecture. And in the next class, we'll be looking at tobacco and government. Be touching that a little bit about the government's history with tobacco. So we look forward to that. Come back and see us then. And we'll see you then. Till the day breaks and the shadows flee away. I am Dr. Cooper, and I love you, and I appreciate you.